This Monday, a significant breakthrough. Hamas agreed to release all Israeli hostages and showed a willingness to consider President Trump's peace proposal. Everyone was united in their desire to see this war end and peace achieved in the Middle East. We are very close to achieving that goal. Will the plan work? I'll speak with Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Also, stalemate. The federal government shutdown continues after Republicans rejected Democratic demands to extend health insurance subsidies. The public knows that Donald Trump and the Republicans have shut down the federal government. Democrats in Congress have dragged our country to another irresponsible shutdown to satisfy their far-left base. How long will it last, and how many federal workers could face layoffs? I'll speak with Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson of Louisiana and Democratic House Leader Hakeem Jeffries of New York. Also, war from within. In a meeting with top military leaders, President Trump warns of what he calls a war from within, that he wants to fight by using the U.S. military against American citizens. We should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds. I'll be speaking with Democratic Senator Adam Schiff of California. Joining me for perspectives and analysis are NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent, NBC News Chief Capitol Hill Correspondent Ryan Nobles, Mark Short, former Legislative Affairs Director for President Trump, and Neera Tandon, President of the Center for American Progress. Welcome to Monday. It's Meet the Press. From NBC News in Washington, the longest-running program in television history, this is Meet the Press with Kristen Welker. Good Monday morning. The nation is at the epicenter of historic moments here at home and on the global stage. In Washington, businesses have ground to a halt for the 5th consecutive day. The government is shut down, with lawmakers deadlocked over how to reopen it, and in the Middle East. Just days before the 2nd anniversary of the October 7th attacks, a possible breakthrough in President Trump's 20-point peace proposal has emerged. Hamas has agreed to release all hostages, and Israel has promised to halt the bombing of Gaza. But with key details still pending, can the nearly 2-year war come to an end? And joining me now is Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Secretary Rubio, welcome back to Meet the Press. Thank you. Well, I want to start with these Middle East peace negotiations. Is this now the end of the war in Gaza? Well, not yet. There's still work to be done. And I would see it in 2 phases in terms of understanding how to break this down. The first piece, which is very clear from the letter and Hamas's response, is that they have agreed on the framework for the president's hostage release and what needs to happen now. And they acknowledge this in the letter and their responses. There now needs to be meetings that are happening even as I speak to you now, and we hope will be finalized. Very quickly on the logistics of that. What that means is, you know who's going to come looking for them? Is it the Red Cross? When do they appear? Where are they going to be? And do the conditions have to be created for that to happen? You can't have bombs exploding and fighting in the middle of this exchange. That's the first piece. The second, and we want to see that happen as soon as possible, the 48 hostages, both living and deceased. And some need to be released, and there are some logistical challenges to that we will have to resolve. But that work is happening even as I speak to you right now. The second part is even more difficult, and that's long-term peace. What happens after Israel withdraws to the yellow line, and potentially beyond that, as this unfolds? How do you create this Palestinian technocratic leadership that isn't Hamas, that isn't terrorists, and with the help of the international community? How do you disarm any groups that are going to be building tunnels and carrying out attacks against Israel? How do you get them to demobilize all that work? That's going to be difficult, but it's critical because without it, there won't be lasting peace. You can get the hostages back. You can get a cessation of hostilities, but in the long run, it's all going to happen again. So both are happening at the same time. But the number one priority, the one we believe we can achieve very quickly, hopefully, is the release of all the hostages in exchange for Israel moving back to that yellow line, which is basically where they were in mid-August. And that's the one we're focused on even as I speak to you now. There are people meeting about that. I want to elaborate on the hostage situation in a moment. But first, in general terms, President Trump seems to be taking Hamas's response as a yes to his peace proposal. As you've indicated, although there's still much that needs to be resolved, Hamas didn't mention laying down its weapons, for example. Do you see Hamas's response as a yes to President Trump's peace proposal? Well, it's certainly a yes at least. Look, it's Hamas, okay? So I'm not telling you here that these are people I trust 100%. Nor should we. But they've basically said they agreed to their proposal and the framework for releasing the hostages. That's a huge achievement. They've also agreed in principle. In general terms, to go into this idea about what's going to happen next, the Palestinian technocrats, etc. There are many details that will have to be worked out there. But look, this is a plan the president presented. But let's remember that it has the strong support of the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the Turks, Indonesia, all these others. So there's a lot of international pressure on Hamas to make this happen. And we're going to need them, the European Union, and countries around the world to also participate in making this work. So that second phase, the phase you're talking about, disarmament. Demobilization isn't going to be easy, it's going to be difficult. But it's really important because without demobilization, there won't be lasting peace. A lot of work needs to be done there, and we recognize that, and we want it to work. And we're going to do everything we can to achieve it. Prime Minister Netanyahu has indicated that he expects the hostages to be released as soon as this week. Is that your expectation, that the hostages will be released this coming week, Mr. Secretary? I mean, I wish the hostages had been released yesterday. Now we need to work out the logistics of how that's going to happen. I mean, and again, this sounds simplistic, but it's not just about making sure there's no fighting. You have to make sure the Red Cross can get there. What time they're going to be there. Where they're going to be. All of that has to be resolved. And that's not easy in the middle of an active war zone. That has to be de-escalated, and that's exactly what they're meeting about now. I mean, that's what the talks are about. That's what the high-level talks in Cairo will be about tomorrow. They could be released. Our expectation? Yes. We want it as soon as possible. There's no doubt about it. We want it as soon as possible. It needs to happen as quickly as possible. We'll know very quickly whether Hamas is serious or not by how these technical talks go in terms of logistics. But we absolutely want these hostages, all of them alive, released as soon as possible. Let me ask you about Israel's role in this. Israel hasn't agreed to a complete withdrawal from Gaza. What's the time frame by which the United States wants to see that happen? Are we talking weeks, months, years? Now listen. So, first of all, they've agreed on, that's part of the liberation, to move back to the yellow line, as they've called it. It's basically where Israel was in mid-August, and so they've agreed on that piece. And I think ultimately everyone has agreed, including Israel, that eventually, at some point here, as this process unfolds, Gaza will be ruled by a Palestinian technocratic group, other than Hamas, other than terrorists, with the aid, assistance, and guidance of an international consortium. That's the goal that everyone who signed this agreement has agreed to. Well, that will take no. That will take yes. In terms of, yes. You can't establish a government structure in Gaza other than Hamas in 3 days. It takes time. And when we ask Israel, okay, it's on the yellow line now. Everything behind it has to hand it over. It has to have someone to hand it over to. So, let's be realistic here. You can't just establish some kind of new government structure inside Gaza in 72 hours. It's going to take some time to do so. The important thing is that there's a plan. It's being implemented. It has the money. It has the support. It has the expertise, and it's moving forward. And everyone has agreed on the parameters of it, but that's ultimately the goal here, which everyone who signed President Trump's agreement has agreed to. Mr. Secretary, I want to read point 19 of the President's peace plan. I'll show it so people can see it. It says, quote, "As the reconstruction of Gaza progresses and the Palestinian Authority's reform program is faithfully implemented, the conditions can finally be in place for a credible path toward Palestinian self-determination and statehood, which we recognize as the aspiration of the Palestinian people," does the Trump. Administration now support Palestinian statehood, Mr. Secretary. Well, look, first of all, that provision was very important to the countries that signed with U.S. Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, etc. All of them, really. That's a very important point for them. I think the most important point to read from that is that he has to have someone to hand it over to, right? Someone he can hand it over to. We've always said that if there's going to be a two-state solution, it has to be negotiated with Israel. He has to make sure that Israel's security is taken into account. And so I would argue that I wouldn't say this is a new policy position. What? I would say is that they want to be able to control Gaza, a place Israel has no interest in governing. They want to hand it over to someone, some organization that will govern it, that doesn't build tunnels and sponsor terrorism and cross the border and kidnap, rape and murder Israelis. That's who they want to hand it over to. And right now, that doesn't exist. That has to be built. But Mr. Secretary, in terms of where the administration stands, yes or no, does the Trump administration support that? That's not a yes or no question. That's a process. No, but that's not a yes or no question. That's a process. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we've always said this has been the consistent position of this administration. Myself and many people who have watched this for a long time, for that aspiration to be even credible. It has to be realistic. We cannot have a Palestinian state ruled by Hamas, or any terrorist organization whose stated purpose for existence is the destruction of the Jewish state. That would never work until Gaza is ruled by people who are not interested in destroying Israel. Till there are no security threats emanating from Gaza against Israel. He's not going to forget about statehood. He's not going to have peace. So we have to create the conditions for that, which will take time. And that will be part of what these negotiations are about in the coming days. But right now, the number one priority is getting the hostages released. If we can't even get an agreement on the release of the hostages, there's not going to be long-term peace here. So let's get that peace done. It's the most important, and then we can move on to phase 2, and it will give momentum to the rest of the effort. But this isn't going to be easy. No one said this was going to be easy. We're dealing with something that's been going on for a long time. All right, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, thank you very much for your time this morning. We really appreciate it. And when we return, the government shutdown stretches into its second week. How does it end? House Speaker Mike Johnson and House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries join me next. Welcome back. And joining me now is House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries of New York. Leader Jeffries, come back to meet the press. Good morning. It's great to be with you. Well, it's great to have you here on a very busy morning. Of course, I want to close, but first, I have to ask you about these developments in the Middle East. Of course, Hamas saying it will indeed hand over the hostages. Leader Jeffries, let me ask you, do you support President Trump's 20-point peace proposal? Well, I support a path to a just and lasting peace, and that needs to involve ensuring that every hostage and the remains of those hostages still in Gaza are released immediately. Of course, we need to increase humanitarian assistance in Gaza so that we can alleviate the immense suffering of Palestinian civilians who have been endangered through no fault of their own in a theater of war. And of course, we need to ensure that Hamas lays down its weapons and that we have a governing structure in place that allows for normalized relations between the Palestinian people and Israel. Okay. Well, let's move on to the big news here in Washington. Of course, which is the shutdown. Before lawmakers left for the weekend, House Speaker Mike Johnson said the House wouldn't return to the Capitol this week or on tour until Speaker Schumer reopens the government. When was the last time you spoke with Republican leadership? Well, the last time there was a conversation with the Republican leadership was at the White House meeting last Monday. And unfortunately, since then, Republicans, including Donald Trump, have gone radio silent. And what we've seen is negotiation through fake videos. The House canceling votes, and of course President Trump spending time on the golf course yesterday. That's not responsible behavior. As Democrats, our view is that we will find bipartisan common ground with our Republican colleagues to reopen the government, to actually pass a spending bill that meets the needs of the American people. But we need to decisively address this Republican healthcare crisis that is devastating hardworking American taxpayers. You know, Democrats are demanding an extension of Obamacare tax credits, which expire at the end of the year, as well as other healthcare benefits for the funding bill. Here's what the vice president said about that this week. Let's take a look. It's a lie told by Democrats who aren't trying to provide healthcare benefits to illegal aliens. It's a lie that's obviously false if you just look at the text they gave us. He says the Democrats are lying. What's your response to that? Well, unfortunately, Republicans are lying because they're losing in the court of public opinion when it comes to what's happening right now. We're standing up for the healthcare of hardworking American taxpayers. Working-class Americans, middle-class Americans, and everyday Americans who have watched in recent months as Republicans passed their one big, ugly bill, the largest cut to Medicaid in American history. Hospitals, nursing homes, and community health clinics are closing across the country, including in rural America. If Republicans continue to refuse to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits, tens of millions of American taxpayers will experience dramatically increased premiums, copays, and deductibles, and that. Information from their insurance companies is coming out right now. Federal law now clearly prohibits spending taxpayer dollars to provide health care to undocumented immigrants. Period. End of story, and no Democrat on Capitol Hill is trying to change that law. But Leader Jeffries, let me ask you, because as you just mentioned, you're also calling for a complete reversal of the Medicaid cuts that Republicans just passed. They say it's unacceptable. Why include that? Why not focus on your argument that you want to see those Obamacare tax credits extended, which expire at the end of the year? This Republican healthcare crisis is all-encompassing and has been devastating to the well-being of the American people. We're talking about people in rural America, working-class America, urban America, small-town America, the American heartland, and black and brown communities across America. Now, we've made it clear that in terms of what's immediately before us, there is, of course, an urgent need to address the Affordable Care Act and the Republicans' refusal to extend these tax credits. What we're talking about here is a dramatic impact on real, everyday Americans, a married couple of two. For example, earning $88,000 a year. A modest amount currently pays about $8,000 a year for their health insurance. That's already too much. But if these Affordable Care Act tax credits expire, that same couple will be forced to pay $24,000 a year. It's unaffordable. It will bankrupt them. It will leave them without coverage. And those are the people we're fighting for. But let me ask you, because you say this is a Republican shutdown, but it's Democratic senators who are withholding their votes on what's called a clean resolution. That means no strings attached, which is something that, frankly, Leader, you and other Democrats have advocated for in the past. Let's take a look. The threat of shutting down the government isn't used to try to advance its political agenda. The first thing the House needs to do is pass a clean, 6-week continuing resolution. A continuing resolution at the FY 2023 levels is the only way forward. Why not fund the government and debate extending Obamacare tax credits after the fact? They don't expire until the end of the year. Well, what we've asked for is a bipartisan negotiation where Democrats and Republicans can sit down in good faith, reopen the government, and pass a spending bill that truly improves the quality of life for the American people in an environment where the cost of living is already too high. Republicans promised to cut costs on day one. Costs aren't going down. They're going up. And if these Affordable Care Act tax credits are allowed to expire, healthcare premiums and costs will skyrocket. The United States is already too expensive for the American people because of Trump's failed policies, Trump's tariffs. And this will make things worse. So we just want a bipartisan negotiation that addresses the healthcare crisis simultaneously, with the urgency of now. Let me ask you, because the administration has attacked you personally with memes during this negotiation. We'll show a screenshot of one of the videos. This was posted by the president. The president also called the Democrats the party of hate, evil, and Satan. Is the president someone you still feel you can negotiate with? Do you have that relationship with him? Well, that behavior is outrageous. It's unhinged. It's unreasonable. And it speaks for itself. The American people deserve better than lies. Attacks fake videos, and the president spending all his time on the golf course. We need serious leadership, and Leader Schumer and I will continue to make it clear that we will sit down anytime, anywhere with anyone to address this issue with the seriousness it deserves. To stand up for the American people by addressing this cost of living crisis and this healthcare crisis that Republicans have visited upon the country. All right, Leader Jeffries, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thank you. And joining me now is House Speaker Mike Johnson of Louisiana. Mr. Speaker, welcome back to Meet the Press. Thank you for having me. Thank you very much for being here in person. Let's talk about your latest move. You announced this week that the House won't be in session until the government reopens. But there are still things you could be doing. There are appropriations bills you could be working on. There's a new Democratic Congresswoman who still needs to be sworn in. Isn't there still critical work you could be doing on behalf of the American public? We're doing that critical work. Let me start by saying I'm listening to my friend Hakeem there. And when we used to have debate competitions in high school, we were taught to watch out for red herring. Red herring is a distraction. Literally everything my friend just said there was unnecessary because what he's trying to talk about is the December funding issue. Healthcare provisions. Some of these Obamacare subsidies that expired on December 31, you're completely overlooking the fact that we need to keep government open to have those bipartisan debates and discussions you just mentioned. The simple continuing resolution we passed in the House over 2 weeks ago does exactly that. It's clean. It's only 24 pages long. It's the simplest thing ever done. And it's exactly what Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and everyone else said should be done. He watched the tape. We can play that tape for hours, all of them saying this passionately, as recently as earlier. This year that we had to keep the government open to do our job, there's still critical work to be done. Mr. President, and as you know, many Democrats have looked at your motion. They're saying the House isn't in session because it doesn't want to swear in this newly elected senator, the Democratic Congresswoman from Arizona, who would be a critical vote to release the Epstein files. How do you respond? It's totally absurd. This has nothing to do with that. It's another red herring. The reason the government is shut down is because Chuck Schumer and 43 of his Democratic colleagues in the Senate have now decided to vote multiple times to keep the government shut down. We need the lights back on so everyone can do their jobs. The House did our job. We passed a clean, bipartisan, continuing resolution to keep the government open, and what did Chuck Schumer send back in response? His counter-proposal would add $1.5 trillion in new spending for a simple, 7-week stopgap funding measure to keep the government open so all these appropriations bills can be finished. And they want to claw back $50 billion we put into rural hospitals to shore them up. They're not serious. This isn't a serious negotiation. They're doing this for political cover because Chuck Schumer is afraid he won't win his next Senate re-election campaign because he's going to be challenged by a Marxist in New York because that's the new popular thing there. Let me ask you about some of the issues at play here because President Trump, the White House says it's preparing to potentially actually lay off thousands of federal workers. That's never been done before in a shutdown. Do you support laying off thousands of federal workers as part of this shutdown? We haven't seen the details yet about what's happening. It's an unfortunate situation that the president doesn't want. The president asked Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries in the Oval Office about a week ago, please don't do this. Please keep the government open, and we'll solve all these problems that we have plenty of time to solve. What do you want to see then? Do you want to see thousands of federal workers laid off? No. I want Chuck Schumer to do the right thing he's done throughout his 30-plus year career in Congress and vote to keep the government open. But we've never seen temporary layoffs before. We don't see temporary layoffs. We don't see layoffs, though. In a situation like this, where Senate Democrats have decided to hand over the keys to the kingdom to the White House, they have to make difficult decisions. Russ Vought heads the Office of Management and Budget. He now has to look across the entire federal government, recognizing that funding streams have been cut off, and determine which programs, policies, and personnel are essential. That's not a job I enjoy. But you're required to do it for Chuck Schumer. Okay, well, let me ask you about what's at the heart of this. Democrats are demanding that the funding bill include an extension of the Obamacare tax credits, as we've been talking about. They're set to expire at the end of the year. More than 3/4 of the people who get health insurance through Obamacare actually live in states that President Trump won in 2024. We're talking about 19 million people. Mr. President, can those people depend on Republicans in Congress to extend those health insurance tax credits when they expire? We have plenty of time to resolve that because it doesn't expire until the end of the year. Are you